Welcome to the Ray Harryhausen podcast, the show dedicated to the life, career and films of a special effects titan. Join us as we host in-depth discussions about the work, influences and legacies of this uniquely talented filmmaker. Brought to you by the Ray and Diana Harryhausen Foundation, we will be delving into Ray's archive to bring a unique insight into his work, including exclusive audio from the man himself. We will be joined by special guests for retrospectives, exclusive announcements and competitions, so this podcast is a must listen for all fans of the world of Ray Harryhausen, animation and classic filmmaking. Hello and welcome to episode 36 of the Ray Harryhausen podcast and our third Vodcast. So you can listen to us in the usual places on iTunes, on Spotify and on SoundCloud. And of course you can watch us in the magic that is YouTube. And this is our third Vodcast episode. So I do encourage you to have a watch of this because there's lots of visual treats coming up. This episode is going to focus on the poll we ran on Harryhausen The Lost Movies, the scenes or films you'd most like to see made. And joining me as ever is the collections manager for the Ray and Diana Harryhausen Foundation, Mr. Connor Heaney. Connor, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon. Yes, I'm great, and it's been a lot of lockdown fun, I guess, with this Lost Movies poll, and it's been very interesting for the results to come in because I don't know about you, John, but with our top 10 Harryhausen creations last year, I felt that I could have a fairly educated guess about which creatures would be voted in the top 10. Maybe not the final order, but which creatures would be people's favourites. With this poll, with the Lost Movies poll, I really had no idea what people were going to go for, and I have to say that the top 10 was a bit of a surprise to me in places too. Fascinating to see what resonates with people from your book, Harryhausen The Lost Movies.
Absolutely. There's a giant version behind me, or have I been shrunk? Have I gone to Lilliputs? Am I Lilliputian? Interestingly, for this episode, rather than just hearing from us, we're speaking to the great and the good and great friends and family of the Ray and Diana Harryhausen Foundation, where they give us their top three. And you've managed to collate, haven't you, Connor, different videos from around the globe.
Yes, that's right. We thought it would be interesting to get back in touch with some of the people who contributed to the research for your book, who provided quotes or information. And it was great to hear their feedback and the diversity of opinions on the films from Ray's archive, which they'd love to have seen. And yes, we're going to hear a variety of voices and thoughts throughout this episode, and as you say, a few visual treats as well from the various footage and artwork that exists for these projects.
Now we're going to be counting down the top 10, and we're going to tell you what didn't make it and what was just outside the top 10. We're giving away 5 copies of the books that will be signed by my good self, and they'll include the limited edition Comic-Con art card from 2019, which is ultra rare, and of course a bookmark. And so by the end of the episode, you'll know exactly what made it to the top, to the number 1 spots, and you'll also find out if you're one of the lucky recipients of a signed copy of the book. So we should really kick off maybe with our first contributor, Con, and then we'll go into the chart. What do you think?
Yes, that sounds good. And who better to start with than Ray's daughter, Vanessa Harryhausen. Vanessa obviously is very close with many of these projects and has a unique point of view in that she was around and she heard her father's thoughts on a lot of these projects which weren't made, and even saw him drawing some of the artwork for these lost movies. So let's dive right into to hear Vanessa's thoughts on her favourite top 3 unmade projects.
Hi everybody, my name is Vanessa and I'm daughter of Ray Harryhausen, and I wanted to put forward 3 of my favourite Lost Movies sort of pictures that I like, and one is People of the Mist, and that is because I saw Dad drawing these wonderful pictures and sketches in his office in the younger days. And it was wonderful, and it just made me want to see the film just from the sketches. The other one was Skin and Bones that Dad always talked about. He wanted Woody Allen to be the main guy in the skin and bones thing, which I think would have been quite fun, a little comedy. But sadly, that didn't come through. And last year we found some extra sketches that Dad did, just rough sketches of the skeleton and stuff that in Skin and Bones. So that was fun. And then lastly, because Dad and I were always interested in Atlantis, it's a pity that his sketches from Atlantis never really came into a film, because I think that would have been really quite exciting and fun. But there you go, there are my 3 favorites. So maybe one day these will come too. Okay, thank you, bye.
Fascinating, because Vanessa's view is quite different to lots of other people's. Without giving too much away, other people mention lots of similar titles, but Vanessa's gone for 3 very specific ones, and I must say 3 brilliant choices. I agree with all of those choices Vanessa's made. That's superb. Now, just as an example, you set this poll up, Connor, and we're very grateful that you did all the hard work on this. And you asked people not only for the favourite unmade films, but unmade sequences as well. And can you tell us which was the most beloved unmade sequence from a film that was made but had a scene altered? What number was that at, and which one was it?
Yes, so there were scores of sequences which we have artwork for, or which Ray had planned for, which didn't make it into the final film. The most popular of all of these was from, you might have guessed, The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, and it was an alternate Cyclops scene that came in at number 17th in our poll overall, and that would have seen 2 Cyclops facing off against one another. You also would have seen a giant snake as part of that sequence too. So I suppose people really love the Cyclops from 1958, and the opportunity to have 2 fighting against one another, battling for Sinbad and his crew shortly after that barbecue sequence that is so memorable from the film. This seems to have struck a chord with people amongst all of the unrealized scenes.
And Vanessa mentioned People of the Mist. That made it there, didn't it? With a 6% 6% swing, 6% vote there from members of the public. So let's head in now to our next bit of video footage. And when we come back, we'll be talking about what made it just outside the top 10. So next up is author and all-round good guy Richard Holliss, who, of course, for fans of fantasy cinema, they'll know his great work from books and magazines all over the years. I remember reading him in Starburst magazine when I was at school. And of course, he wrote for us Harryhausen The Movie posters, which hopefully all of you have got there. Now, Richard kicked off his top 3 with a man-eating plant from a film that was made, but from a sequence that was cut. Let's take a look.
There's a scene in Mysterious Island that Ray had planned that was never seen. It ended up on the cutting room floor. He had made drawings for it. He'd even done a storyboard. It was all about a giant man-eating plant, a sort of huge Venus flytrap on the island that attacks the castaways. What a thrilling sequence that would have been. And just looking at those drawings, you realise just how vividly Ray would have brought that huge creature, that giant flower, to life. 1 Million Years BC was made in 1966. I also saw that at the cinema. Again, I remember the thrill of watching the Ceratosaurus and the Triceratops having a battle. The Allosaurus attacking the camp. Archelon pulling its way across the beach to the sea. There's also a Brontosaurus in that film that walks along in the background. But Ray had also planned a sequence with that. There's a scene in the 1940 Hal Roach version called 1 Million BC, of which 1 Million Years BC is a remake, where a lizard attacks some cavemen. Now they use live lizards, not stop motion creatures, but Ray was going to use his Brontosaurus model. He was going to bring it to life and have it attack these cavemen in their cave. If only we could have seen that sequence, it would have looked fabulous. Of course, there are again some wonderful storyboards and some wonderful sketches of the scene to give us some idea of exactly what Ray would have done with it. And there's also a very interesting production still from that particular sequence that was never made. So although it doesn't appear in the film, we do have that to look at as well. I suppose my favourite 1960s film of Ray's is First Men in the Moon, based on the novel by H.G. Wells. There's not a lot of dynamation in the film. Ray's proprietary process for bringing stop-motion creatures to life, it didn't gel very well with widescreen cinema, unfortunately. So he resorted mostly to blue screen and matte work. There's a little bit of stop-motion, probably with the moon calf in particular, and some little tiny pieces with the Selenites. But Ray loved H.G. Wells' work, and the one book of Wells that Ray had always wanted to make was The War of the Worlds, again a favourite novel of mine. 1953, George Powell brought out a version of that film, an Oscar-winning version, but Ray would have kept his book, or his concept of the book, very much more to the way it was, with tripod machines and the Martians looking very much how they're described in the novel itself. Again, Ray produced some beautiful drawings of just how his War of the Worlds might have looked. He was going to set it in modern day, then 1950s, but even so, just looking at the concept art, looking at some of the storyboard ideas for the War of the Worlds, you realise just what he would have done with that story. He even did a short 16mm film showing a Martian emerging from its cylinder after the Martians first arrive on Earth. Of all the films of Ray's that he never had a chance to make, certainly The War of the Worlds would have been the one I would have wanted to have seen. Of course, we only had 16 films in Ray's career to enjoy. 16 fabulous movies. I just wish in a way it had been 100. Somehow for this special centenary, it would have seemed most appropriate, don't you think?
Great stuff. Richard even had all of those creatures out, which was good to see, Connor. It looks like they had escaped from the Foundation, but they're from Richard's private collection. They're lovely, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I do love seeing people's personal merchandise and things they've collected over the years. And again, it's lovely to hear Richard's choices. I think it gives you a good sense of his personal taste. And he has also chosen an alternate scene, something from 1 million years BC, which I think we all would have loved to have seen, an extended version of the Brontosaurus sequence. There's some fantastic artwork and storyboards for that.
Now, what surprised me was that Force of the Trojans, which was the sequel to Clash of the Titans, didn't make it into the top 10. In fact, it's at number, which number is it on the poll? It's got 6%. So it's in equal third billing with People of the Mist.
15th place overall 15. Of the some 80 or so choices that were there. Force of the Trojans, what I suspect maybe has happened is the people who were interested in Force of the Trojans also very interested in People of the Mist and those lost projects from the 1980s, which and it's maybe split the vote slightly. But yes, I was also quite shocked by that. Force of the Trojans, probably one of the most notable and kind of well-known lost movies.
Here we go. Next up is Ron Fogleman, who's a good friend of mine and a senior executive working in the world of film and television and now in theatre. So some of you may have seen his show in the West End, the official Twilight Zone on-stage performance. Here comes Ron.
My name is Ron Fogleman, Ray Harryhausen The Lost Movies. So, what are my top 3 choices of what could have been if only Ray had said yes to some of the amazing projects that never went ahead? All of my choices have something in common. The red planet itself, Mars. You might think me more of a Mars obsessive than Elon Musk, but think you'll understand why I've selected these 3 projects that were not to be. So first up is War of the Worlds. Just what would Ray have made of H.G. Wells' classic tale? Ray had the idea back in 1949, a few years before his pal, one George Powell, brought the project to the screen himself in 1953. Ray planned to relocate the action to the US, where a newspaper reporter and an astronomer would be caught up in the action. We would have seen a version of the tripods with actual legs, unlike the sweeping, majestic vehicles Powell realised on screen. In fact, Ray shot 4 minutes of 16mm colour test footage that saw a Martian creature emerge from a cylinder that had landed on Earth. There are also fantastic storyboards of a Martian creature attacking an isolated farmhouse. So what happened? Ray pitched the project to Paramount, who held the rights. He even approached Orson Welles, so associated with the Wells story after The Night That Panicked America, when his radio interpretation shook the nation back in 1936. Nothing happened. It may have been a case of a great idea just too soon for the studio. He even pitched the project to George Powell, who would later claim the project for himself. Ray's own invasion task force from other worlds would be delivered in the impressive Earth versus the Flying Saucer in 1946. Those sleek spinning saucers still impress today, and one wonders what Ray would have achieved if matched with H.G. Wells' masterwork. Still, his passion for Wells was finally realised in 1964 with his glorious take on First Men in the Moon. Next in at number 2, well, Edgar Rice Burroughs is a literary master whose prolific work is often underrated by his own penchant for the odd sequel, or 2, or 3, or even 20. The original Tarzan, as an example, is an incredible work. If you've never read it, then it's worth picking up. His highly imaginative novel captures in great detail the jungles of Africa and convincingly portrays ape civilization years before David Attenborough sat with the Silverbacks. Ray is linked with one of the first attempts to bring Edgar Rice Burroughs' epic 11-novel Barsoom series to life, featuring his legendary hero, John Carter of Mars. This was something he considered in 1959, having already delivered the first of his epic Sinbad movies to the big screen in Dynamation. Ray and his producing partner Charles Schneer tried to option the rights, but found dealing with the Burroughs estate almost impossible, with terms and option fees more out of this world than the epic adventure they imagined for the film itself. It was not until 2012 that Disney brought Andrew Stanton's production to the screen, a movie which deserves revisiting and is better than the media's feeding frenzy on its poor box office suggests. And last, but certainly not least, in at number 3, Mars features yet again, with Ray's next hoped-for outing for Sinbad in Sinbad Goes to Mars. In 1978, after the success of Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, Kenneth Kolb, the original screenwriter of Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, had been commissioned to write a screenplay that would take the hero on a journey beyond our world. Sinbad heads to Mars to rescue a princess taken from her home on Alexandria. There, Ray's beloved hero would encounter a planet overrun by giant moths and their most evil queen obsessed with immortality. Although Ray and Charles were never satisfied with the script, the project haunted Ray, and in later interviews he would cite it as one of the main projects he wished that he'd most been able to make. Later consumed by his work on Clash of the Titans, there is no concept art from Ray himself, but there are some great pieces by Seamus Flannery and Chris Foss. Well, what might have been, I've just scratched the surface with only 3 of the many entries that appear in John Walsh's excellent volume dedicated to Harryhausen The Lost Movies. It's a great book, and once you pick it up, you'll easily find yourself lost in the wonders of all that sits within it. Thank you.
Great choices there, and two of them were from Mars. So he chose John Carter of Mars and Sinbad Goes to Mars. These are all great choices. I'm like the worst person. I'm like asking a child in a sweet shop, "What's your favourite?" And my mouth falls down. I like them all, because I'm the wrong person to ask.
I think you're getting a good idea of people's personal tastes as well. Obviously, Richard Hollis's choices kind of geared towards the science fiction elements and unused sequences from Ray's films, and Ron Fogleman here, he's gone for space-based dramas and Martian epics, and we all would have loved to have seen Sinbad Goes to Mars. I think that would have been a fascinating prospect.
Now, what most surprised me is the 2 that made it just outside the top 10. So at number 12 is Baron Munchausen from 1950. So Ray was interested in doing this long before Terry Gilliam had created his 1980s version, but there had been a German version, I think, before then. So it's great to see it so high, and it's great to think that the project's so beloved, Connor, because Terry Gilliam's film was quite controversial for being very expensive and initially not well received, but it is well received now.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I've got this the artwork behind me here for Baron Munchausen, and I think it's very evocative. It's I suppose, a rare case of Ray using oil painting to create this concept art, and the test footage that we do have for Baron Munchausen with the Moon Man and the dialogue, which was supposed to be synced with the stop motion animation. Incredibly ambitious for Ray to try that. That I'd say that would be in my top 3 personally, as Baron Munchausen. I would have loved to have seen how that may have panned out in the early 1950s for Ray.
Now, I'm obviously very few of the ideas that didn't have artwork have made it into the final top placings. None have made it into the top 10, I think. But so, in a sense, we are judging this from the artistic point of view. We are judging it from our eyes, and as you said rightly, that's a beautiful piece of artwork. So I'm wondering to what extent the artwork has influenced what people want to see. They see beautiful art and think, I think I'll have that one. That whole thing about don't judge a book by its cover, although that's a good cover. It's it's tantalizing, isn't it? I'm sure psychologists would work through this chart and tell us and break down for us the motivations of people voting. But should we move on to our next special guest, Connor?
Yes, next up we have Jonathan Webb, and as Jonathan explains in his video, he is fairly biased towards one particular project because he's somebody that worked with Ray in the 1990s. Jonathan is an animator and who worked on some fantastic projects with Cosgrove Hall, including the Discworld animations and many more. And you'll hear Jonathan's choices here.
I'm Jonathan Webb, and I've been asked by the Harryhausen Foundation to list my top 3 unfinished and unmade Harryhausen projects. It's a very, very difficult, very enjoyable list to compile, and I'm slightly biased because my number 1 project is one I was fortunate enough to work on as a designer and sculptor. That project is Odysseus the Legend, which I was working on for Cosgrove Hall when we were working with in conjunction with Ray Harryhausen on that project. And a lot of that work, a lot of the designs are featured in the John Walsh book, recently published, Harryhausen The Lost Movies. So that would be my number 1, and I really wish that project had come to fruition. It was very, very exciting. Number 2, I think, would be Sinbad on Mars, and the reason I think I'd choose that one is because a lot of the design work was done by Chris Foss, and Chris Foss is one of my favourite science fiction illustrators and artists, and he's worked on films from the there was an unmade version of Dune, I think, it was going to be made in the 60s, and I think Chris Foss did a lot of very, very interesting work on that. I think he also worked on Alien and most recently Guardians of the Galaxy. So I think a project that would include Chris Foss's designs in conjunction with Harryhausen's creatures would have been really interesting, and I'd love to have seen that. And project number 3, and this is sort of in no particular order. Project number 3, I think would have been Conan the Barbarian, and this was obviously some years before the Schwarzenegger version. I think it was about 1969, 1970, and I think it would have been really, really interesting to see the character Conan in a Harryhausen movie. And one of my favourite artists is Frank Frazetta, and I love all the work and the cover work that he produced over the years for Conan. And I think 1969 would have been very early, I think, for Frazetta to be producing Conan artwork. I'm not sure if he was doing it at that time, but I think if he was, I think that sort of artwork in conjunction with Harryhausen's creatures would have been really interesting. I don't think any of the films have quite captured the Frazetta style or the Frazetta look. But I know that Frazetta was a big King Kong fan and Harryhausen fan as well. And I would imagine that a combination of his sort of artwork and lighting and the sort of designs that he would have had in conjunction with maybe Harryhausen's creatures would have been, I'd love to have seen that. And also I think it would have been interesting to see an actor other than Schwarzenegger, or other maybe than a bodybuilder turned actor, to play that role. And I would love to have seen maybe Jack Palance. I think Jack Palance facially would have been great to see playing Conan. He's not a bodybuilder; he's more sort of athletic build. But I still think it would have been a really, really interesting piece of casting. I've no idea if there was ever any discussion about that. But for me, that would have been a dream piece of casting. See Jack Palance playing a role like that. So anyway, that's my top 3. and I'd be really interested to hear other people's top threes and see what made it to the top. Anyway, thank you very much.
That's great. Now, I think Jonathan, out of our special guests, was the only one to mention Conan the Barbarian. And, you know, when people of my generation think Conan, they think, of course, Arnold Schwarzenegger, the marvelous film from 1982 from Dino De Laurentiis and John Milius. And of course, it was remade more recently. But of course, it had a fabulous life in pulp magazines, comic strips, and so on. Are you a fan of Conan?
Yes, I love Conan the Barbarian, the books and the Arnold Schwarzenegger film. But I think most fans of Conan would point out that the Arnold Schwarzenegger version is very different from the contents of the original Howard short stories. And you get the feeling that Ray would have created something that was a lot more aligned to the character in his original form. I think if you look back to Jason and the Argonauts, for example, and the casting that was made for the likes of Hercules, very different, not a bodybuilder, not a muscle man. And I think Ray's version of Conan would have been slightly more lithe character, and the stories therein would have tied in far more to the original source.
I think, though, all credit to Dino and John Milius for doing, and Oliver Stone, who wrote the screenplay, because they created something that the studio said couldn't be done, which is an R-rated or an X certificate, if we're thinking UK certifications from the time, an X certificate, big budget fantasy film, where your primary audience, which would be juvenile males, would be locked out because they wouldn't be allowed in to see it. So quite a big risk for a big studio to take, and it paid off handsomely, I think, for everyone concerned. Let's move on now. Mark Mawston is next, and he's chosen 3 films with a similar theme.
Hi, I'm Mark Mawston. I was friend and photographer for Ray for the last decade or so of his life. We sat down on many occasions talking about lost projects. My sort of favourites that I'd love to have seen myself would have been, as everyone would have, at the end of Jason the Argonauts, where they said there were further adventures for Jason. We'd all love to have seen that. The other one that springs to mind that I discussed with him was the amazing concept of Sinbad Goes to Mars. And I asked Ray, how on earth would Sinbad go to Mars? And he said it was a pyramid with a beam of light which would transport Sinbad there, which basically forecasted Stargate many, many years later. So that's incredible. The other one that we discussed, which I'd love to have seen, was Ray's involvement in the original Thing from Another World with Howard Hawks. He actually told me he'd approached Howard Hawks about making the monster for this. This is the poster for the film, in case just to remind you. That was something I'd love to have seen, because I thought James Arness as the Frankenstein monster was a little bit of a disappointment, but as Ray said in his dulcet tones, it was still a great movie, which it was. It's a classic. The main one though, however, would have been this little beauty, which is Ray's version of The War of the Worlds. Now this is a movie I think all Harryhausen fans would love to see. We've had a tiny taste of it with the stop motion tests that are discussed at length in the Lost Projects, but this is a film that I think would have ranked as one of Ray's best, and he talked about it with such passion, and his friend George Powell obviously made it instead of him, but I think Ray's version would have been amazing because it would have been set at the time the novel was set in England, and obviously the Martians would have been quite incredible. So this is the one I'd love to have seen, and Ray knew how much I loved this film and kind of gave me this, his own print, which is the first one done from this series, and I've even got a little H.G. Wells signed thing at the bottom of this. So this is something I treasure, but this is the one Lost project I'd love to have seen. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you again.
So interesting, you touched on it earlier, Connor, how people have chosen films in a kind of a genre of their preference. And of course you have Sinbad Goes to Mars, Think from Another World, and War of the Worlds. You can imagine that as a marvellous late night triple bill, couldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from what Mark was saying in his video there, as a photographer that worked with Ray, I always get the impression that when people were working with Ray, the subject of favourite movies and just, you know, what to watch, I guess, seemed to come up quite often. And you get his personal anecdotes there about Ray's taste in films and the films he maybe could have made. And so it's really great to hear about the, you know, once more the War of the Worlds. But the Thing from Another World, that's one that's unique to Mark there. That's one that he'd like to have seen. I suppose when we think of that film, we think of the original and the remake. Some incredible special effects in the remake, but of course the original, quite subtle effects for the invading creature. So next up, we have a contribution from Greg Kulon. Now, Greg is a long-term fan of Ray Harryhausen and is somebody who met Ray on a number of occasions. But as well as this, he is a very knowledgeable collector and researcher with regards to Ray's work and towards stop motion in general. Now, Greg is somebody that we're always delighted to meet with whenever we're in the USA, and he has helped us out with a number of projects over the years. He also has a very impressive collection of his own, which you'll see in this video, some excellent pieces. Greg is also somebody who assisted with the research for the Lost Movies book and has helped the foundation with a number of our projects over the last 3 or 4 years. So thank you to Greg, and enjoy listening to his very interesting choices.
Hi, I'm Greg Kulon, longtime Ray Harryhausen fan. I'd like to thank John and Connor at the Ray Harryhausen Foundation for giving me an opportunity to talk about the Harryhausen Lost films that I would have liked to have seen had they been able to come to fruition. And I'll start off with the first one of my choices, which is a standout, which would have been The War of the Worlds. The War of the Worlds is an amazing novel, and it may be the first or one of the very first novels I ever read on my own as a child. And it continues to amaze me today with its imagery. Now, I don't want to disparage the George Pal version because I love that film, but I thought the George Pal film was not the novel in many ways. It did too much updating, lived with scientists in the military, and of course it didn't really show the aliens as they were described, or the alien machines, the tripods. And I had the privilege back in 1993, I think it was, to visit a Ray Harryhausen exhibit of his artwork and models. And the one thing that really stunned me when I first saw it was some of the artwork. One of the Martian emerging from the pod, the ship, in front of some people, and then I saw right next to that several of Ray's storyboards of a farmhouse scene where the people are there with the Martians and an axe encountering these creatures. And as soon as I saw it, I said, that's the version of the film I wanted to see. It looked exactly like it captured the feel of the Wells novel. Now, I realized that Ray's version was going to update the plot and put it in the United States, and although I'd rather see it as a period piece, I can understand for practical reasons why he would have done that, but I just wanted to see those tripods, and I wanted to see those Martians as well as visit them, and I thought Ray did a perfect feel of capturing that. The second of Ray's projects that stands out for me that I'd really like to have seen was The Elementals. Again, this would have been about the same time period in the early 1950s. And if you've seen the artwork for the film, I mean, the scenarios are just wonderful. And it's got a beautiful flying creature that seemed to be so much beyond any of the designs that you would have seen for any kind of flying monster at the time. And yet there's a lot of other things in the story that would have been, I think, amazing. And when you see these things nesting in the Eiffel Tower, they're scientists finding their cocoons, trying to figure out what's going on here. It just seemed like it has a world of possibilities from the visual perspective, and I think setting it, as Ray wanted to go to Paris, I think that setting it there would have really added something to the story, with contrasting the beauties of that city with the what I think could have been some very nightmarish scenes of finding these creatures and their nests. And I'd love to have seen that film made. The artwork just continues to amaze me today. So the third film that I had to think long and hard about here was not an easy choice, but it would have been The Food of the Gods, and I'll give several reasons for that. I really would love to have seen Ray Harryhausen and Willis O'Brien work together on another film, and another, not something like The Animal World, a staged scene, but another full-out, fleshed story. Because given what they had done together in their careers, and the incredible imagery in Mighty Joe Young, I think Food of the Gods could have been a real special project. It's a wonderful novel, it's actually kind of in multiple parts because you have the giant animal scenes, almost the potentially humorous scenes with the chickens, but I think Schoedsack called it the horror scenes of the rats, and it could have been really exciting. I envisioned this scene that they could have produced, dates back to the novel, and was in the story treatments that Schoedsack and Ruth Rose were working, that would have had a chase scene with the heroes are in a carriage drawn by horses and being chased by rats that are several feet long, multiple rats, and they eventually grab onto the horses and pull them down, knock over the carriage, and it could have been both an exciting chase scene and kind of a horrifying scene at the same time. And I can imagine how that would have looked in the film. I'd love to see what Ray and Obie would have done with a scene like that.
Now, let's get kicking into our top 10. Do you want to reveal the first two of the top 10 before we go to our next video, Connor?
At number 10, we have The Valley of the Mist from 1950. And at number 9, The Abominable Snowman from 1946. What was your take on these finalists?
I was really surprised because I'm pleased that the older projects have made this in. But my suggestion earlier that people were led by the artwork, of course, is quite wrong, because we have some of the most gorgeous artwork for Force of the Trojans, and we have some sculptures as well. And that's languishing back in the bottom of the top 20, like Bucks Fizz in the mid-80s. This is really surprising. You know, this is not the top 10 I was expecting. And I don't know if people listening and watching this have predicted any of these. But as you said, Connor, it was easier to predict Ray's Creatures of all time because people have, for a long time, talked about those online. But this is the first time the unmade stuff's being talked about, and I was pleased and surprised. But as I look down to number 8, which we'll reveal after this next clip, next up, Mark Wolf, who's been a great friend to the foundation and has helped me enormously with this book, Harryhausen, The Lost Movies. And he, of course, was trying to make one of the films that Ray was trying to make. And Mark has also helped me with Flash Gordon, the official story of the film, which has been Rondo nominated. So if it's not the end of April when you're watching this, do think of voting for me as best book of the year. Of course, Vanessa Harryhausen's book is in there too, so it might be a battle of the trustees, a bit like Rocky IV. But I fancy myself as Drago, but that never. I
think I know who would win a fight, to be honest with it.
I do too. And as I say, if I'm already pitching myself as Drago, I mean, I'm going to look the part, but of course, I'm going to end up on the mat, on the floor. But let's take a listen to what Mark has to say.
Well, hello, everybody. This is Mark Wolf, and I want to first of all say thanks to the Foundation for giving me a chance to talk about one of my very favorite subjects, Ray Harryhausen. For those of you who are old-timers who have been around a while, you may have encountered some of my past writing about the great animator himself. Those of you who may not be familiar with some of the stuff, I should point out that I started many years ago with things like Cinefantastique and some very early articles talking about the men, the technicians, the artists, the craftspeople, and how they did things. Then I was very fortunate to get involved with what is now regarded as the legendary FXRH. Sam Calvin and Ernie Farino created it. I was just happy to be able to tag along and contribute what I could and when I could. And then I went on to some projects like this magazine, Close Up, and we did articles on Golden Voyage of Sinbad and other films that Ray and other animators had put together. More recently, I've been doing articles for Fantastic 50s in the United Kingdom. I'm working with Hemlock Books. And as you can tell from this cover, there's a suspicious Rhedosaurus in this issue. So, over the years of admiring Ray's movies, never occurred to me that someday I would actually meet him. I did, And I spent a lot of time with him and Diana and Darlene O'Brien. And we often had time to chat. What would you like to make, Ray? What would you like to do? Well, one of the things that we discussed at length was he really thought he wanted to do a horror film. Couldn't find the right project. But in my imagination, I could see Ray creating a Frankenstein monster. I could see Ray doing a vampire human to a bat monster. I could see Ray's werewolf being agile and ferocious and unstoppable, a primal force of nature. Then on the other side of the scale, we talked about comedy. And Ray said he and Charlie just could not find the right property. They wanted to try and expand their horizons. They thought about it, they had discussed it, but Ray knew that it would take a lot of effort to, even though he was a wizard with timing and understood body language and certainly had an appreciation of Laurel and Hardy and Buster Keaton and all of the other cinema clowns. But Ray knew that to go from creatures to something comedic, what was it going to be? What was the bridge? We talked about something else, and it was War Eagles. It was a project that was near and dear to him. It was a project I thought had tremendous potential, and it was just not meant to be. I regret that we were never able to say to each other, I have the relationships with the studios, let's team up, let's go in, we'll make a pitch. Ray retired after Clash of the Titans, so there was just really no way to go forward with it. Now, those of you who have the book, which is essential, this was a dream come true for me. And those of you who have it know that I am going to say the one thing I most wanted to see Ray do was an adaptation of the Edgar Rice Burroughs Mars novels. John Carter of Mars has been done as a feature film, and it was too little too late. Ray Harryhausen, Jim Danforth, and Mark Wolf all tried at different times to make deals with the Burroughs people, and each of us had our own problems trying to work something out with them. I took in a rigid sculpture of the four-armed Martian Tarkus. And Marion Burroughs, the widow of Edgar Rice Burroughs, looked at it, and she was with her son, John Coleman Burroughs, who had been an illustrator doing the John Carter comic strip in the 1940s. And they said, this is the very best representation we've ever seen. We really want you to do it, Mark. We know you're going to do it right. And of course, we're prepared to give you an option. They wanted $500,000 for a year option. And at that stage of my career, it might have well asked for $50 million. It was just not going to happen. But I made a 16 millimeter short of some footage showing the Thark and what possibly it might look like in stop motion. But Ray didn't get a chance to do that. Now, if he had, I suspect his armature would have looked something like this. Let me try. There we go. This is a full jointed ball and socket armature created for me by Tom Brierton. And he did an absolutely superb job with it. It has hinged toes, has a breathing device, a mechanical breathing device, and it is a work of art. And those of you who are familiar with Ray's Cyclops, you will see the shoulder up here. It's very similar to what Ray designed for his Cyclops. So there you have my few cents about the projects I wish I'd seen Ray bring to the screen. And I must say, I really wish I'd had a chance to work with him on something like that. So thanks again to the foundation, and everybody stay safe.
There we go. So Mark Wolf, he's great because he also fills in a gap, doesn't he, Connor, in Ray's working life and working lineage, because both men were involved in a film that they both tried to get made, John Carter of Mars.
Yes, I think Mark Wolf is describing maybe some of the logistical problems behind these lost movies, whereas a lot of us are daydreaming, well, why couldn't all of these films be made? Look at all this wonderful artwork. Wouldn't it be great if there were 20 more Ray Harryhausen films? I suppose Mark Wolf has given us a glimpse behind the scenes into the machinery of how a project gets off the ground and how you get a film onto the big screen. And I suppose for each of Ray's films, all of these hurdles had to be overcome, which makes it incredible to think that he did make these 15 movies, because making a film is a difficult job, I guess.
No, it is. It is, absolutely. And now, so back to our chart, and Sinbad Goes to Mars makes it to number 8. So that would have been right on the heels of Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger. So had Clash of the Titans not been made, Sinbad Goes to Mars would have been up next. And of everything in the book, it's the one that's the most surprising because, of course, the beautiful colour artwork was not provided by Ray Harryhausen, was it, Connor?
No, that's right. And the artwork in the book is an incredible sight, but it was actually made by Chris Foss, the artist who's always been responsible for some fantastic illustrations over the years. But as you mentioned, not a Ray Harryhausen artwork. And I have to say that when it came to our poll, Sinbad Goes to Mars was the most controversial in terms of our social media content. Some people saying they would have loved to have seen it, others saying they're very glad that it didn't see the light of day. I guess it's a bit like Boobo the Owl. Whenever we post a picture of Boobo, there's lots of debate amongst Ray's fans. And
there's no debate here. I'll have them.
Well, this proved to be the one where obviously enough people love the idea to vote it into our top 10. But it was interesting to see the arguments that broke out about whether people would have liked to have seen Ray take his mythological hero Sinbad and transport him to another planet.
Well, the thing is, for people who know the storyline quite well, and we have all the paperwork here, we have the full treatment. A few years later, Roland Emmerich's Stargates, that was made with Studio Canal, impressively retreaded some of the steps of what would have been Sinbad on Mars very successfully. So I think rather than it seeming like an outrageous clash of genres, I think it would have worked beautifully well. But of course, my opinion is massively biased. Now, number 7, before we kick into our next contributor, Rossum's Universal Robots from 1945. Lovely artwork, Connor.
Yes, the artwork here is great, and you have to look at the timing there, 1945. So Ray, once more, sort of ahead of the game with his ideas there. It's Rossum's Universal Robots, based on a novel by Karel Capek. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But it's about robots which are sort of discarded by humanity and learn to become sentient and think for themselves and eventually overcome the human race. Sounds a lot like Terminator or something, but of course we're looking here at the mid 20th century, 1945, and I guess that would have been fairly incredible to see in the post-war period. Of course, by the 1950s, there were robots everywhere, and that's, I think, partially the reason that Ray decided not to follow up on this incredible concept art. But yes, I have to say a project I wasn't necessarily expecting to see in the top 10, but it's nice to see that it's captured people's imaginations.
Absolutely. Now, should we kick into our next contributor?
Graham Humphreys. Now, Graham Humphreys is an artist, creates a lot of poster art and Blu-ray cover artwork that you will definitely have seen if you're a fan of I guess any genre entertainment releases. You will have seen Graham's artwork over the years, and Graham was far too modest to mention this in his video, but he created something very special for the Lost Movies book, John.
Yes, he did. He created artwork, fully finished artwork for War of the Worlds, which we're enormously grateful for, because Ray created test footage, and of course he did some production art, but he didn't do a full color poster. Why would you? The film wasn't finished. So Graham did a spectacular job and created exclusively for Harryhausen The Lost Movies the War of the Worlds artwork. So should we find out if War of the Worlds is in his top 3, Connor?
This is Graham Humphreys. I'm a freelance illustrator, and like many people of my generation, very influenced by Ray Harryhausen's work. And I remember going to the cinema to see Jason and the Argonauts, and that was, very much sort of one of those things which really kind of shifted my perception of cinema, and made me kind of interested in probably some of the darker things that since kind of defined my work. I work mostly in the horror industry, and those skeletons in Jason and Argonauts just were seared into my brain, and they're always there in the background. In fact, I used to have nightmares about them, but however, I got rid of my nightmares by actually painting them as much as possible. So I'm still painting skeletons today, and I'm keeping it at bay. But anyway, the fantastic book, which is very much about the project which never really happened. I've got a copy here, and I've been searching through it because there's so much in there you kind of just wish had been made, and I wanted to see on a big screen with Ray's fantastic magical touch. But just quickly going through a couple of them, I've actually got a little friend here which would lead me on to one of the first ones, which is King Kong versus Frankenstein, which I know had a kind of a Japanese version that was made, but it's fascinating reading about Ray's take on this. And going back to King Kong, of course, would have been such a joy for him as well. And just adding in there the Frankenstein element. I mean, for a horror fan, who doesn't want to see King Kong and Frankenstein together? So that was my first real kind of joy in the book. There's another one which appealed to me, and it's going back to those skeletons again, funnily enough, which is Skin and Bones. It has this amazing illustration, which is a skeleton sitting up in bed, terrifying the lady there who's kind of pulling at the sheets. And the premise being that it's, I believe, a photographer who becomes invisible, but his skeleton remains, strangely. And it's just one of those films you kind of just wish had been made. I want to see a skeleton walking around and terrifying people. Or actually, this random idea that he would just suddenly become invisible without meaning to, and just the skeleton remains. So that's a sad loss to the world, I think, though, and to the world of skeletons. And the other film which kind of fascinated me was People of the Mist. It's a Rider Haggard story, and I was a big fan of She, and always wondered if there should be some sort of other version of She, because the Hammer version never quite fulfilled the expectation of the original novel. There were so many visual elements there which really could have benefited from probably a lot of CGI, which I'm disgusted to say, but actually that probably would be the case. People of the Mist was interesting because I just love this bizarre premise that you've got dinosaurs, this kind of lost continent, I guess, though, and then bizarrely you get aliens controlling evolution. Where did the aliens come from suddenly, though? So just that whole mix of dinosaurs and aliens, and some of the beautiful drawings which kind of give you this very sort of colonial centric view of the world, the natives and exotic locations. It's one of those weird things which is very much the stuff of Victoriana in many ways. And the Victorians gave us so many great images and designs and inspirations for film. And this is one of those films again which is sadly lacking in Harryhausen's canon. But I would hope that at some point these projects will see some sort of light of day. This is like a wealth of material which was never made. And when you look at a lot of contemporary cinema now, you kind of realise that there's a sort of a lack of great ideas, and this book is just packed full of them. So I am hoping, fingers crossed, that Skin and Bones, People of the Mist, King Kong versus Frankenstein will see the light of day for a new generation.
So marvellous choices there from Graham Humphreys. And for those of you who know his work, then you probably have his wonderful book, Hung, Drawn and Executed, The Horror Art of Graham Humphreys. And you can see all of his wonderful work in that. Of course, I remember seeing his iconic Evil Dead poster, which a lot of people think was the original one first done for the first cinema release in America. It was everywhere. It's really spooky. Check it out. What's up next, Connor, in the charts?
So next on our list, as we count down the top 10, going back to another older project, and it's War Eagles from 1939. Now this is another Willis O'Brien project, and I guess it's something that's quite important to Ray and his personal history as a filmmaker, because War Eagles was the project that Willis O'Brien was working upon when Ray first met him. So when Ray, as a teenager, introduced himself to Willis O'Brien and took his models to show and looked for some advice as a stop motion animator, he described the scene as Willis O'Brien in the MGM offices with wall-to-wall artwork for War Eagles, which had been promised as being 3 times the size of King Kong, just this incredible stop-motion extravaganza of special effects.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a really good choice. I was hoping to see that in the top 10, and it's clearly there. What I wasn't expecting to see in the top 10, which is at number 5, is the Jupiterium from 1937. I mean, one of the very earliest things Ray did. And the artwork for it is absolutely incredible. It's very Flash Gordon, in fact. Were you surprised to see 1937's The Jupiterian there?
Well, I suspect this is because the artwork is so good. I think the Jupiterian, I'm always impressed when I see that drawing, because Ray drew that when he was 17, and you just get this feeling of a young creative man just letting his imagination run wild a little. He later said that the Jupiterian creature maybe was impractical, the dimensions weren't right for a believable stop motion creation, but nevertheless a very striking image, and I suppose it's something that people have seen, and they would have loved to have known whether Ray could have developed it further. But an important early experiment, I suppose, testing the limits of the design process and of concept art.
Now, I would have expected to have seen the elementals in there before the Jupiterian. Shows what I know. Now, our penultimate contributor is Mike Hankin. Mike, of course, is an author, great friend of the foundation, and an all-round oracle when it comes to questions about the world of Ray Harryhausen. So with my book and with Vanessa's book, and probably with Richard Holliss's movie poster book, Mike is the person you go to. So if you think of the oracle in The Golden Voyage of Sinbad, which was played by Robert Shaw, wasn't it? Uncredited Robert Shaw. I think in a nice way, I think of Mike Hankin as that oracle. So if I was Sinbad, I wouldn't be, because I could never imagine all that traveling. I'd be moaning and groaning. Are we nearly there yet? Oh, I don't like being on a boat. I'd be like that all the way through. But in the event I did make it through all the way to that crypt, Mike Hankin, I imagine, would be there giving us all the information we need. Do you think, Connor?
Yes, Mike is the person we turn to, and we've exhausted, when we can't find the answer to something, he usually can summon that information fairly quickly, and it's great to have somebody that's so invested in Ray's lifetime and all of these different projects. So he's somebody I think it was fascinating to turn to and discuss the Lost Movies.
It's been difficult trying to think of these sequences that Ray could have made. I know chats that I had with him, I expressed that I had a favourite film, which was the 1959 Journey to the Centre of the Earth, and I wished that he would have been around and he had done the prehistoric creatures in that film. But I'm sure the people at 20th Century Fox would have frowned upon him coming in doing that. But I'm glad to say he did make a Jules Verne film, and it was also the first film of Ray's I saw, which was Mysterious Island. And one of the sequences that I wish he had made is the man-eating plant. So that is my first choice, really. Ray always amazed me how he could manipulate many heads, and it would be many tentacles or tendrils, as the plant would be. And I'm sure that would have been a fantastic sequence. I know that they said it was too similar to the octopus type creature at the end, but I still think they should have made space. Even if the character of the Green Man that was supposed to have been involved would have been discarded, I'm sure they could have got around it, but that is what I would have chosen. The second was in the following film, Jason and the Argonauts. I do wish they'd included the trip to Hades. I think the whole thing of inside the cave and meeting the two-headed dog, which I know they had models, and so it had been made by Arthur Hayward. But Arthur Hayward had actually made the dog. And I do think that had been a very good, eerie sequence. What else? The one that I think a lot of fans had wished had happened was King Kong. Now, Ray loved that film to bits. Obviously, it got his career on the go. Whether or not Hammer would have had enough money to do it justice is something else. I think it wouldn't have been the film that Ray would have wished if he had actually been involved. If it had the finances of Peter Jackson, or I won't even mention the other King Kong, then maybe it would have been just amazing to see Ray's own take on King Kong. I think that would have been amazing, and also probably fulfilled an ambition, because he was always mentioning that's if anyone did it, he would want to do it. It didn't happen, but we can just dream. My other choice would have been the Elementals. The whole idea of these creatures in Paris. Paris has never really been used as a good monster location, I don't think. And I can just imagine these creatures hanging from the Eiffel Tower and picking people off. And also that they came from deep in caves, and that would have been a great sort of thing for Ray to work on. I mean, everyone, I think, would have seen his experimental footage of himself being picked up by one of these creatures. So I knew it could have worked, and I'm a little bit surprised it didn't take off when it did, after Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. But I certainly think it could have been a very, very, very good and unusual project for him as well, out of the ordinary.
Great now to hear from Mike Hankin. Of course, he chose the man-eating plant, which has been chosen before, and his mentions of King Kong are great. I mean, Ray did consider trying to do, didn't he, Connor, something with Kong at different times. They tried to get the options for Kong, and it never happened. Of course, Dino De Laurentiis made his spectacular 1976 King Kong. So Kong always casts a shadow, doesn't it, over all of Ray's work?
Yes, I mean, Ray saw King Kong, the original King Kong, I should say, so many hundred times throughout his life. And I get I think from what Mike says there as well, Ray was starting to believe that if anyone was going to do it, he felt he could do it justice and create a tribute to his favorite movie. Sadly, that didn't come about, but yes, King Kong is everywhere. In our archive, there are so many books and drawings and pieces of memorabilia relating to King Kong. It was a lifelong piece of inspiration to Ray.
Now, Connor, would you like to introduce what hit number 4 and number 3 in our all-time chart of lost movies?
Yes, at number 4 was Conan the Barbarian. And at number 3, we have Atlantis from 1940. Now, we've spoken about Conan the Barbarian, but there does seem to be, I suppose, something in the idea of a Ray Harryhausen take on Conan the Barbarian, which really appeals to people. The Fate of Atlantis is another very early project, and I guess it's one that people would love to have seen Ray's take on that mythological tale.
Absolutely, and just as a point of note, I mean, Mike Hankin would know this, but for people who don't, there is a link between the 1982 Conan the Barbarian and Ray Harryhausen. It's, of course, the wonderful Colin Arthur. Colin, who did lots of practical and large piece models in Ray's films. He created, I think, the Vizier's mask for Golden Voyage of Sinbad, amongst many other makeups. He created the Lord of the Marsh Calabos for the face makeups for Neil McCarthy in Clash of the Titans. And he created a very large kraken that was sunk in Malta for sequences underwater. So Colin's a good guy. He created the giant snake for Conan the Barbarian, which I think is superb. It's easy to look back at special effects with today's eye and suggest they could have been different. I think it works really well. There's a weight and a size to that snake, and it moves quite slowly. It's really quite menacing. Do you think so, Conor?
Yes, I mean, as I say, I love the Conan, the 1980s Conan the Barbarian, and that snake sequence is one that I remember from seeing it the first time. I think there's something about that entire film, much like many of Ray's films, which seems very otherworldly, and you feel like you're almost watching a relic from an alternate history. And the special effects on that snake were something that stood out, and it's obviously a theme of that movie. So, fantastic job. And I think that Colin worked on a couple of the follow-ups to Conan the Barbarian with Conan the Destroyer and Red Sonja, and was responsible for some of the creatures in those films as well.
He was indeed. Now, before this episode finishes, we've got one more contribution from someone, and then we're going to be giving away 5 copies of Harryhausen The Lost Movies, signed by my good self, and with an art card and a bookmark. So if you've entered the competition online, you've entered the poll, then stay tuned, because you might be finding out if you're a winner. So our very last contributor is writer, author, and film critic Marshall Julius, who's not coming to us from a fabulous emporium. This is his own private collection that he has stood in front of. Marshall Julius, take it away.
What 3 Ray Harryhausen films or sequences would I have loved to have seen? All of them. Reading John Walsh's excellent Harryhausen The Lost Movies book, I was shocked to discover just how many projects Ray didn't get to do. So many epic sequences cut from films we know and love. So many films that never made it past Ray's drawing board. If I'd had a movie studio back then, I'd have given Ray all the money he needed to make everything he ever wanted. I'd have had to clone him as well, I guess, as even with all the money in the world, one lifetime wouldn't have been enough to get everything done. At least we have John's book, so all those wonderful ideas and all that glorious concept art is available to us to at least try to imagine how wonderful it would have been to live in a world with 3, 4, 5 times as many Ray Harryhausen films. Since I've been tasked with selecting just 3 films or sequences, I appreciate I have to be more specific than saying all of them. So my 3 choices in no particular order are, well, in Ray's hands, The War of the Worlds would have been epic and eerie and terrifying and just, perfect in every way. Ray had the idea to do it in 1949, long before his friend George Powell produced the 1953 version, which, though it won an Oscar for its dazzling effects, I think would have been so much better with stop-motion tripods instead of spaceships hanging from strings. Ray even went so far as to produce test footage of a Martian emerging from a tripod, and that unnerving footage is almost too tantalising a taste of what might have been. As there's no skeleton like a Harryhausen skeleton, my second choice is Skin and Bones, an amusing romp that Ray pitched in 1962. Based on Thorne Smith's 1936 novel, it tells the peculiar tale of a photographer who, while messing around with various chemicals, becomes sort of invisible. Everything disappears except for his skeleton. So there's an alternate universe somewhere where Ray got to make a contemporary comedy with a beautifully animated skeleton getting up to all sorts of mischief. And I wish I lived in that reality. For my final choice, I'm going to pick a sequence rather than a movie, just to mix things up. I would have loved to see the man-eater sequence Ray dreamed up for 1961's Mysterious Island. In it, the islanders were to be menaced by a giant Venus flytrap-style plant, perhaps inspired by Roger Corman's ultra-low-budget, cult-quickie Little Shop of Horrors. Ray's mean green mother would have been something else though. Exotic, scary, enormous, quite unlike anything else he'd done. Ray dropped the idea, but it stayed with him, and the Venus flytrap later surfaced in Sinbad Goes to Mars, an unmade project Ray kicked about in 1978, and then again in 1982 for the equally unrealised People of the Mist. Sadly, Ray never got round to his giant Venus flytrap monster, but them's the breaks, you know. Ultimately, I'm grateful for everything Ray was able to realise.
Wow, that just looks like if Willy Wonka had given up the chocolate factory for a toy factory, Connor, that's what it would look like.
Yes, but I always love seeing videos, and I noticed that he took his videos from a few different angles just to give us a glimpse into that incredible collection. What a fantastic job. I hope he has an archivist of his own to work through all of this material that he owns. And
don't give him any ideas. He's already said like this. He said, "Oh, John, I need an archivist." That's what he'd be telling me.
You
next
could
time
catalogue his collection. You could index it. It would be a fascinating job. But that's a great set of choices as well from Marshall. And yes, I think he's made three choices which other people have made. But I suppose he sums up what people what strikes people's imaginations about these unmade projects, and the artwork for all three as well are fantastic.
Now I'm going to reveal the last two films, and then we're going to go into our competition winners. Now the last two are surprising because well, the number one film isn't surprising, but number two is. This really surprised me. As I say, I would have lost a lot of money if I was a betting man and if I'd voted on this poll with money. Dante's Inferno made its 1941, which, great. I mean, it's something that Ray always wanted to do, but as he said himself in my documentary, he felt he couldn't. And let's listen to what Ray Harryhausen had to say about that.
Some time ago, I wanted to make a film about Dante's Inferno because of Gustave Doré's marvelous drawings. But in thinking it over, I wonder very seriously how many people can sit through an hour and a half of the vicissitudes of tormented souls.
There you go. Always better to hear it from the man himself. And for that reason, he didn't make it. So maybe had he seen this poll and if he was able to share this with studio execs, they might have decided otherwise. Now at number one, as many of you may have guessed, because so many of our special guest contributors chose it as well, it is of course 1949's War of the Worlds. So great to see that on top, Connor.
Yes, War of the Worlds is, I think, the project for which we have the most material of all of the Lost movies. We have some incredible concept art with test footage. We even have 2 models from War of the Worlds in our archive which have remained, and I think that more than anything may have influenced people to vote for that as the film they wish they could have seen. In an alternate universe, it may have been Ray Harryhausen's first solo project, and who knows what would have happened after then. I'm sure it would have been a huge success, but the resulting movies that Ray created may have been very different had that been his first hit and his first solo movie.
I think people needed to hit as broad an audience as possible. So one would have hoped that an audience would have been found for that project, but we don't know. So now we've come to the competition time. We almost need a little drum roll here. Should we hear a drum roll? There we go. Wow, how fabulous. Sounds like Phil Collins on the drums. Now, I'll give the first 2 away. Connor, you can do the last 3. Is that okay?
Yes, that's good.
So the first winner, congratulations to Brian Serper. So you're going to be getting a copy of this book behind me, not shown to scale. It's actually around about this kind of size. Still pretty big. And well done, Michael Brown. So they're our first 2 competition winners. Connor, who are the other 3?
And yes, congratulations to John Larkin, to Roger Robinson, and to Chiara Pizzarotti. Congratulations to you all. Your book is in the mail, or will be in the mail soon after John signs it. And thank you all for taking part in our poll. You have been the lucky winners amongst the thousands of votes that were cast.
Now, Connor, what's the update? Because we're being asked a lot online, aren't we? What's happening with the exhibition? When can we go along to see it? So before we finish off, what can we tell folks?
Yes, so the Ray Harryhausen Titan of Cinema exhibition in Edinburgh will be reopening this month on April the 26th. As with so many things just now, it's a phased reopening, so I imagine to begin with it will only be people in the immediate vicinity of Edinburgh that will be able to visit, but that will broaden out over time, and we certainly hope that people from elsewhere will be able to travel to Edinburgh and enjoy this incredible, massive exhibition that has been put on. Now, the good news is it's been extended. It's now running until the end of February 2022. So there's the best part of 10 months left for the world to open up again, and for people to be able to travel and take part in cultural events and come and bask within Ray's fantastic creations and artwork. If you're still unable to travel, there's also a parallel virtual exhibition available online to anybody in the world at any time. If you go to the National Gallery's website, and that gives you a virtual glimpse into the exhibition and the contents of the exhibition, alongside some exclusive AR material and interviews, brand new interviews and clips and films that have been put together specifically for this virtual experience, featuring the likes of Randy Cook, Vanessa Harryhausen, Caroline Munro, John Walsh is in there too somewhere, and Mark Caballero and Seamus Walsh from Screen Novelties, who of course helped Ray complete the story of the tortoise and the hare, which another feature of your Lost Movies book, John. So there's a lot to delve into there, and we hope that in one way or another you'll be able to experience the exhibition and enjoy Ray's incredible legacy.
Excellent. Well, that just leaves me to say thank you very much, Connor. Thank you for everyone who took part in the poll, and do keep watching the films, and we hope to see you up at the exhibition. And for those lucky winners of the book, please leave a review online when you've received it, but only if it's a 5-star one. Right, thanks very much, everyone. We'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Goodbye.
Copyright in the Ray Harryhausen podcast is owned by the Ray and Diana Harryhausen Foundation, a registered Scottish charity, number SC001419, 2021. This recording may not be reproduced in whole or in part without written permission from the Foundation. The views expressed within these podcasts do not necessarily reflect those of the Foundation, its trustees or employees. For further terms and conditions, please contact us at rayharryhausen.com, where you can find our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter links.